2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 134 today. And I am here with my guest, Captain Dan Hanley. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure having you. So, Dan, what have you been up to today? Anything much?
Not really. I had to get up at 6 a.m. with my 7-year-old granddaughter who practically lives with us to get her off to school, and went back to sleep for a while and then got up. I've got two podcasts today, so I was kind of preparing notes, different ones for each program I'm going to be on, but really just sitting around talking to my wife and being lazy today.
Sounds good. What shows are you going on to after this?
Oh, just what's his name? I just mentioned his name and I can't think.
You said Stu Peters. Stu
Oh,
Peters.
Stu Peters.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going on his program at 9:30 my time tonight, and then I've got two more on the weekend. One of them, actually, it's an Australian radio company, but the guy is in New York. I've interviewed him once, and do you know who Nino Rodriguez is, the boxer?
Not too sure about that. Not too sure.
Okay, he's got a podcast. He's going to have me on Friday night, so I keep busy with these and the organization that I'm a director of. So
sounds pretty good. How's the weather like there in Pakistan at the moment? Is it good or bad, or?
Oh, it's good. It's cooled down considerably, which is always a welcome to me because I don't like the heat in the summertime. But no, it's very pleasant right now.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good. Pakistan is one of these places a lot of people don't know about. A lot of people will say it's very, a bit dangerous. I mean, it is going through a bit of a rough time at the moment. But I've seen some hiking photos of some of the hikes in Pakistan. They're beautiful, man. Like some of the tourist sites. What would you say is one of the most popular tourist destinations to go hiking there? One that you really recommend for people?
Oh, up in the northern regions, it's like, we're living right here in the foothills of the Himalayas, but if you get up higher elevation, it's sort of like Switzerland. I haven't been up there myself. I can't think of the name of the region off the top of my head right now. But yeah, there's some gorgeous places in Pakistan. And as far as it being unsafe, when I first got over here 13 years ago, the war on terror was still raging, and I was concerned coming here being an American and with the illegal drone strikes that were killing civilians over here. I thought maybe everybody hated Americans, but nothing could be further from the truth. They don't care too much for the U.S. government and its foreign policy, but they're very warm and friendly to foreigners here. They stare a lot. I'm a foreigner, so when I go out, I'm used to people looking at me. So
yeah. I mean, when did the drones thing stop in Pakistan? Is it still going on? Is it stopped now?
No, it's pretty much stopped now. I can't remember. A couple of years ago, they had a huge military operation called Operation Zab or something like that, where they went up into the northern regions and cleaned it out, and things have been pretty peaceful. Except there's been a few terrorist attacks up north, and I'm not sure really what that's all about, what brought it about. But other than that, I don't go up in the northern region along the Afghan-Pakistan border, but Islamabad's probably the safest city in Pakistan. It's well guarded,
So, Dan, you flew commercial, flying for over 50 years. You run the organization Whistleblower, like the 9/11 pilots whistleblower. Can you explain to me more about your organization, like your background, and also can you explain to me more in detail the mission and the purpose of the 9/11 whistleblower organization? And you also say in your info that it wasn't actually Muslims who, like how the media will say it was Saudi Arabian hijackers who actually did that. You say that it was actually the Israeli government. Can you please explain to us in more detail why it could have not been Muslims, and also regarding that? Go ahead.
Right. As far as my background goes, you said 50 years. That's making me look real old. But I wanted to be a pilot ever since I was a kid. And I started flying 55 years ago in 1968, first as a civilian, where I acquired my private commercial instrument and multi-engine rating by 1970, and finished college, and the Vietnam War was still raging, so I had to make service plans. And I entered naval aviation in 73, got my wings in 74, and over a 10-year span of time, I flew the P-3 Orion aircraft that was used to track Soviet submarines during the Cold War. I was hired in 1978 as a pilot by United Airlines and flew six commercial jets there. So all total, over a career span of 35 years, I flew 15 different aircraft, accruing 20,000 flight hours. Now, why do I bring that out? I'm not bragging about my credentials, but I want to make a statement that with all my experience, I could not have flown the 9/11 flight profiles, in particular the Pentagon profile, and neither could the alleged Muslim hijackers. And there's thousands, if not 10,000s of pilots that will agree with me, but not one single pilot was permitted to testify before the 9/11 Commission as to the absurdity of this ludicrous notion that these hijackers flew the aircraft. You mentioned our organization. I currently serve as director and international public spokesperson for a global grassroots effort called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. And we got a website at 911pilots.org and a YouTube channel at 911 Pilots. But the purpose of our organization is exactly what you said, to show that there were no Muslim hijackers controlling the 9/11 aircraft, but that the aircraft were electronically hijacked and remotely controlled through employment of a system called the uninterruptible autopilot. It's a system that takes complete control of the aircraft autopilot and flight management computer and fly the aircraft wherever it wants to its selected target. And once this system is engaged, the pilots can no longer disconnect it. Now, one of the goals of our organization has been to recruit highly trained and experienced pilots, whether they're active or retired, military or civilian, from around the world, who will attest on camera to the fact that not only could the hijackers not have flown the flight profiles, but that they could not have flown the profiles themselves. So on our website, if you wanted to call up 911pilots.org and follow along, we've got a menu at the top of the page. And if you go to the drop-down menu, there's a page called Remote Control. And a lot of people say to me, come on, you're talking about remotely controlling a large commercial jet aircraft. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. And if you look at that page, you'll see that remote control technology of large aircraft goes back to 1944, 79 years ago, towards the end of World War II. The U.S. Army Air Corps launched Operation Aphrodite out of the UK. And what they did was take old B-17 bombers and gutted them out to lighten the weight of the aircraft and loaded it with the Torpex, which is they put 30,000 pounds of this Torpex in the belly of the airplane. It's a highly incendiary compound. And pilots were required to make the takeoff, but once they got airborne, they'd bail out of the aircraft. And the aircraft was remotely guided to targets in Europe. This was 79 years ago this was happening. If you jump ahead, and there's other examples we could cite, but we don't. But if you jump ahead on the website, we take you to 1984, 40 years later, when NASA and the FAA conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location where they took a 4-engine commercial jet, a Boeing 720, loaded it with crash dummies and a camera because they wanted to test crew and passenger survivability in the event of a crash landing. Now, they took this big jet off by remote control, flew around the pattern, and landed several times before they intentionally crash landed the aircraft. That was in 1984. Now, if you jump ahead to the early to mid 90s, is when we say the uninterruptible autopilot was developed. Now, there's a Wikipedia article on this. They call it the Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot. and it says exactly what we say it does, but it says it was patented in 2006, which leads you to believe that it wasn't produced until after 9/11. Well, we've got a copy of the patent, and it's true, it was patented in 2006, but we have informants that have come out that have shown us that the system was in fact developed and produced in the mid 90s, well before 9/11. So we've got several different videos down there at the bottom of that page you might want to look at, and it should convince you that remote control technology is real, uninterruptible autopilot exists, and it existed prior to 9/11. And what we contend is the hijackers were unqualified in the aircraft they flew, and that this uninterruptible autopilot actually did the flying. If you go to the hijackers, I just want to focus on Hani Hanjour. He was a 29-year-old Saudi Arabian hijacker who came to the States in the mid-1990s and took flight training lessons, and it's well documented that he was a terrible student. He was a poor student. He skipped classes. Basically, he couldn't fly. He went back to Saudi Arabia, and before 9/11 came back to the States, and he was such a poor student that he tried to re-enroll in the school that he had been in, and they wouldn't take him because they didn't want to waste assets on him. They said he was such a poor student before. So let's talk about the maneuver he supposedly performed. The official story says that he flew American Flight 77 that took off out of Dulles Airport in Washington heading towards the West Coast. He got up to cruise altitude for a while, then did an about face and started to descend into Washington. And at 7,000 feet, he commenced a descending, accelerating corkscrew turn to arrive 330 degrees, to arrive precisely at the surface at 500 knots without skidding the surface. And that's the big important thing. He was only a few feet off the ground, and he didn't skid the surface, to strike the Office of Naval Intelligence at 500 knots on his first attempt. Now, this same maneuver was replicated in a simulator by another group called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, and they crashed the simulator attempting this maneuver. So we're led to believe Hani Hanjour, this poor student pilot who only mainly flew in light single-engine Cessna aircraft, was able to accomplish this on his first attempt. Well, Hanjour went to the Freeway Airport in Maryland 1 month prior to 9/11 and tried to rent a single-engine Cessna 172. Mm-hmm. And he went up with two instructor pilots, a guy and a girl, on an evaluation flight. It wasn't a training flight. They wanted to see if he could fly. And they came back and told the chief instructor at the airport, who I talked to and confirmed the story with, and they said, don't rent in the airplane, and they didn't. Well, this didn't appear in the 9/11 Commission final report. Hanjour went down the road to the Congressional Air Charter, another fixed-base operator, and supposedly flew with an instructor, an Israeli named Eddie Shalev. And Eddie Shalev came back and said, yes, he's a good pilot. So what appeared in the 9/11 Commission final report? Only as an end note, no testimony taken under oath. Eddie Shalev's statement that he was a good pilot. His name just appeared one time. So what's important about this? Both the FBI and the 9/11 Commission were aware of this information that he couldn't fly, and they suppressed it. So where did it go from there? American 77 hitting the Pentagon, which was a military installation, enabled the United States to say it was an act of war and launch Operation Enduring Freedom, which invaded Afghanistan over a 22-year period, killed 100,000 people. So 9/11 is a perfect example of a false flag. The United States lied about Hani Hanjour and enabled them to invade Afghanistan because American 77 hit a military installation. Now, some people that hear this will say, no, it wasn't American 77, it was a cruise missile. Okay, there was an airborne swap of airplanes. Well, if that's the case, still the uninterruptible autopilot would have remotely guided American 77 someplace else. But we don't go there. We just say the hijackers couldn't have flown the airplanes because they weren't qualified, and the uninterruptible autopilot could. And we say it's the only viable alternative explanation as to how these three airplanes possibly hit buildings that day. So that's basically it. And people come to me and say, "Are you telling me that the United States was involved with the planning and execution of 9/11?" I say, absolutely. And then I cite other false flags like the USS Liberty, the Gulf of Tonkin.
From 1967 that a lot of, conservatives don't read about, and a lot of conservatives will say that Israel is the United States' greatest ally, but how can they be, the United States' greatest ally when you have the IDF training, which has proven that they've gone out and trained ISIS, Hamas, especially knowing the fact that the IDF was formed from, free Zionist terrorist groups that joined together to form the IDF. And then, knowing the fact that the IDF was caught training the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And it's really messed up, Dan. It really is.
It is. But that's basically the information on the
and let's not forget, the IDF was caught, training police in America and teaching police, to do very unconstitutional acts like beating up people, just most of the horrific things. And I when it comes to, the incident of the United States Liberty of 1967, like I think it was the 2,000 people that died that day. It was very bad, and the fact, to hear that you had some of the pilots of that ship, the captain of the ship come out and say, that the United States government was hunting them down, when they were trying to speak out against it, was just really messed up. And, it's just...
Yeah, well, if you talk about people trying to expose 9/11, have you heard of Philip Marshall before?
I think I have, yes. Would you like to elaborate that more for me?
He was the United 767 captain and had written 2 books on 9/11 and was about to publish a third one. And he told his neighbors that he was being threatened. And his neighbors later found his 2 kids and family dog shot to death in their California home.
I have heard of that.
He had a bullet in his head, and they called it a murder-suicide.
That was absolutely tragic. And, especially Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper was a guy who predicted 9/11. He was one of the people, I think in the 90s. You probably heard about him, haven't you, Dan?
Oh, yeah, I have.
He was the guy who really opened the door. I mean, George Carlin was another one. And isn't it amazing how you look at like The Simpsons, how they were predicting something in the 90s like that? It's absolutely insane.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. So, there's a couple other false flag incidents where the United States flat out lied. One of them was the Gulf of Tonkin, leading up to the Vietnam War, where they claimed the USS Maddox was attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the international waters in the Gulf of Tonkin off of Vietnam, which justified their entry of troops into Vietnam. And later, they openly admit we lied. That wasn't really what happened, and you got 58,000 U.S. troops that were killed as a result, and millions of Vietnamese. And then the last false flag that was proposed that never happened, that I wanted to mention, was Operation Northwoods. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not too sure. You can elaborate for me and the audience.
Okay, in 1962, Castro was in Cuba, and the United States wanted to overthrow the government there. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff gave a plan called Operation Northwoods to the Secretary of Defense, who presented it to Kennedy. And what it called for was a series of false flag operations, such as attack on civilians in the United States, blaming it on Cuba, attack a ship in open waters, attack Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. But the big thing was they wanted to swap airplanes in flight and have one crash over Cuba, claiming that Cuba had shot it down, just to enter into a conflict with Cuba. But fortunately, JFK said no to that plan. So that's another example of the sick mind that the U.S. government and the military have with regard to these false flag operations, that they're willing to allow American people to be killed to carry out their agenda.
You know, going back to one thing, a lot of conspiracy theorists seem to miss is the dancing Israelis. You know, the 5 people, you know, who were caught in a car. They were arrested by the FBI and the police, and they were caught celebrating, you know, the terror attacks that happened. And it says here, the FBI came to the conclusion that the 5 Israelis arrested in New Jersey's last September in the 9/11 thing, surveillance mission, which was Mossad, and their employer, Urban Movinov, something that on a front were basically Mossad agents. What is your opinion like to the dancing Israeli stories and the fact that the FBI, you know, let them go without charging them of anything? What is your opinion on that? Because they really should be arrested for that, because in a way, that's, you know, foreign intervention. That's unconstitutional, you know, and stuff.
Exactly, and it proves that they had foreknowledge of the event. And it was Michael Chertoff, the dual U.S.-Israeli assistant attorney general of the criminal division that actually released him back to Israel. So the whole thing stinks. They should have been in prison, but they weren't. And it's just another example of what I consider Israeli and U.S. collusion in 9/11.
Yeah. It is very, you know, disturbing to see that. What else should people know when it comes, and also not to mention that, it also the World Trade Center's infamous 91st floor Israeli and art student project too. That's another strange thing too.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that other than I know that it existed up there. Then there's the question of nanothermite, whether or not they were planning that up there. But I don't know enough about those art students and that to make a comment, really.
Mm-hmm. So with you've tried to reach out to various government officials and officers. Did you guys get any response back? Did you get anything or no?
Well, no, and that's a short answer. But about 3 years ago, we decided that we would approach the federal government with the information that we had, trying to force him to launch an investigation into this uninterruptible autopilot system and our allegations that the aircraft were remotely controlled. And we started out with the FBI, got nowhere, went to TSA. They said go to the FAA, which we did. We got our foot in the door there. They opened an investigation file on us until they discovered exactly what it was we were saying. And then they slammed the door shut and tried to stonewall us, which we wouldn't allow. So we wound up writing letters and emails and making phone calls to everybody: the Secretary of Transportation, the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI Director, you name it, any relevant government office that we thought we could contact, we did. And they stonewalled us. In January, I talked for a half hour with an FAA attorney in Washington. And when he realized we had him cornered with the evidence and information we gave them, he said, Dan, the FAA doesn't conduct criminal investigations, go to the Department of Justice, which I had already done several times. So 2 more times I wrote a letter on behalf of the organization to the Assistant Attorney General Criminal Division, a guy named Kenneth Pollitt Jr. Didn't get a response. He didn't return phone calls. He didn't answer emails. So I sent just September 11th a letter to the White House, knowing that they're not going to read it, but maybe somebody on some staff will, basically saying, hey, we've petitioned every level and branch of the government for 3 years, and we're finished begging. And what we're doing, because we believe that they will never open an investigation into 9/11 in the United States, because we feel the United States government or certain elements of it were complicit in the crime. So what we're doing is taking this to foreign Muslim countries, because we feel like Islamophobia is still flourishing and no one outside the next of kin has suffered a backlash as a result of 9/11 than the 2 billion Muslims on the planet. So we've gone to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which is the United Nations of the Islam world, and they claim to be the collective voice of the Muslim world. And we proposed to them that they establish an International Islamic Commission for 9/11 inquiry, a Muslim 9/11 commission, to take all the information in the world that is sitting out there. I'm talking about hard evidence, and analyze it and publish it for public dissemination globally, because you've got all these 9/11 truth groups out there sitting on all this information, and they don't have anywhere to go with it. They argue amongst one another on social media about who's right and who's wrong, and it accomplishes nothing. We need somehow, going on programs such as this and other podcasts, you're getting out to some people, but there's 8 billion people on the planet, and how are you going to reach out to them?
Mm-hmm. Dan, in all your years of studying like the 9/11 conspiracy, what would you say is the greatest thing, like the greatest fact that like a lot of experts like Alex Jones, Stu Peters, or David Icke, like the one thing that many people seem to miss when it comes to like exposing 9/11?
Well, I'd say it was what we're dealing with, the pilot issue. There was one group out there called Pilots for 9/11 Truth, but the co-founder, one of them died, and the other one doesn't want to have anything to do with 9/11 anymore, so it's dead in the water. But it has to do with the inexperience level of these hijackers. And we believe that the reason that so many people in the world fell for the official story that they flew the aircraft is because they're not pilots, and they cannot conceive of the absurdity of the ludicrous notion that these hijackers flew these aircraft. So I think that's one issue that's been missed out there. Are you familiar with the group Lawyers for 9/11 Inquiry?
I've not heard of them. No.
Oh, okay. A group of 7 lawyers U.S. lawyers got together, and with the biggest whistleblower groups and individuals in the world, and compiled 57 evidence packages and presented them to a U.S. attorney in New York, forcing him to announce the convening of a grand jury investigation into their allegations that World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 were brought down by controlled demolition, and the Twin Towers weren't brought down by jet aircraft impact damage of the fuel fires that ensued, and Building 7 wasn't brought down by a few office fires. And the investigation, as best as they could determine, stalled. Nothing was going anywhere. None of the witnesses were being called forward or anything. So they took it to court. Long story short, they spent a couple of years in court, taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. And just this past year, the Supreme Court refused to hear their case. So I don't know where they're going from there, but that was the legal route. In my mind, that's the only legal act in the 9/11 truth community that was moving forward with solid evidence. Now, we went the political route with the letters and the calls and the emails, and we got nowhere. And that's my point. There's nowhere to go with this stuff. There's nowhere to go with it. What do you? We can talk on programs like this, but nobody's taking any concrete action. There's another group that just formed, and they got a great website, and it's called the International Center for 9/11 Justice. And I talked to one of the guys on the board of directors there and said to him, what's your end game? Do you feel like if you produce enough evidence and present it to the public that there'll be demonstrations on the street or riots, or that people will go to their congressmen and senators and demand an investigation? He goes, no, we just want to enlighten the intelligentsia. I said, for what purpose? What's your end game there? And he didn't have an answer for me, but that's what I'm talking about. A lot of people out there making a lot of noise, but nowhere to go with it.
Mm-hmm. One thing is, a lot of people seem to say that the United States government there's a lot of Zionist influence. A lot of people say that a lot of the Zionist influence really began to take hold after the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And then you have the Act of 1871, which formed the District of Columbia, which turned the United States, which overthrew the Constitution of the United States, turning it into a corporate elitist controlled by the oligarchs and the bankers. Like, how much of Congress would you say is controlled by the Zionist and the Israeli government, knowing the fact that like Donald Trump was not allowed to criticize the state of Israel, knowing that a lot of people think that Donald Trump was against the elite, but in fact he'd keep, standing up for the Israel government when they were committing genocide against the Palestinians. How much influence does the Zionist lobby have of the United States Congress and the Federal Reserve? And knowing on a post you said the most powerful man in the world, what's his name? Pope. He's the Grey Pope. He's the chief of the Rothschild, the chief of the Rockefellers, the head of the Vatican, and the chief of the complete, black noble. Can you elaborate more to us how much Zionist influence is in the United States government, and explain to us more about this most powerful guy in the world, the Grey Pope? Explain more to us about it.
I can only say the Grey Pope exists, and I have been told all the stuff that's on that meme is accurate, because it wasn't until last year I learned about the Grey Pope and the Black Pope and the Jesuits in the Vatican and how much power and influence they have in the world. But as far as the Zionist influence on the United States government, they've got a total stranglehold. You're familiar with AIPAC, right?
Yeah, AIPAC,
American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
okay.
I am. Yeah.
Okay. Well, there isn't a politician from the White House on down to the local level that would dare speak out about 9/11. I mean, former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney said that if you're a member of Congress, you're required to take an oath of allegiance to Israel.
Yeah, I remember that. She was an African-American woman who said that in 2006.
Right, she exposed it and it ruined her. But yeah, they've got a total stranglehold. I believe that they've blackmailed, bribed, or compromised politicians to where they won't dare speak out. And then you've got, if you want to believe the Khazarian Mafia exists, that's their hit. That's their hit, man. If they need to. Yeah,
the Khazarian Mafia. Tell us more about that, because I was watching a video the other day about the Khazarian Empire. Like, a lot of people say that the Khazarian Mafia and the Khazarian, Empire, I mean, it is a bit of a sketchy conspiracy, but how would you say that the Khazarian Empire, in a way, hijacked a lot of the world? Like, what would you say was like the pivotal moment where they hijacked Western civilization, like Western society? And what would you say that people, like the fact that people should know about, what would you say is the most evil thing the Khazarian Mafia has done to society?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. For as far as what it does and how it evolved, there's an audio recording out there, and it's called, write this down, The History of the Incredibly Evil Khazarian Mafia. And it goes back to the year 800 something. And Khazaria, which overlays the Ukraine right now, was controlled.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that, sorry for interrupting, but just wanted to clarify. Also, what is your opinion on them saying that the Khazarian Mafia, are saying that there has a connection to Ukraine, how they're trying to turn Ukraine into this new Israel, which I find it 50-50, because I really don't know if they'll focus on Ukraine, especially after, it losing the war with Russia. What is your opinion on that?
I'm not sure I copy your question. My
opinion. No. I was just saying some people say the Khazarian Mafia is trying to make Ukraine the new Israel. What is your opinion on that?
Right. Well, they came out and announced that they were going to import Jews from Israel into the Ukraine for that purpose of making it the second Israel. Now, I don't know what you believe regarding the New World Order, but I believe they're looking for one world government, one currency, a capital in Jerusalem, depopulation, and the eradication of religion. Now, I believe that in part is what's being fought right now in Israel. Because I'm jumping around here, but I believe that October 7th was possibly a false flag operation in Israel. So I took a poll, not that it's scientific or anything, but I did on Twitter asking that question, and about 80% came back and agreed with that assertion. So, but getting back to the Ukraine, you've got to listen to that audio recording, and I can't regurgitate on the I wouldn't be able to regurgitate everything that's said on the tape. But basically, there came a point in time in the history of the Khazars or Khazarians where they had to choose a religion, and they chose Judaism. And some people call them fake Jews because they wound up, a lot of them migrating to Israel. They call them Ashkenazi Jews or something. That they're not really Jews. But I can't go into it much further than that because I can't remember off the top of my head everything that's on that video recording, that audio recording. But I'm always posting it on, because it ties Khazaria and what happened there later in life to the Rothschilds, what influence and control they had, the establishment of the Bank of England, and what the Rothschilds' stranglehold on the world is right now.
Dan, I just wanted to ask you, sorry I interrupted earlier, but I was just asking you, what would you say is the greatest crime that the Khazarian Mafia has done to Western civilization, and what do you think was the one date that they really took hold of Western civilization, took over it?
I hadn't thought about it really. I'm not really sure. I mean, a great crime I think that they were involved in was 9/11. I believe, I personally believe this, and we talked about who really runs the world. And you can talk about the bloodlines, the Jesuits in the Vatican, the Committee of 300, you name it, the Illuminati, the Bilderbergs, the Rothschilds, the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum, all these things. You take the most powerful, wealthy, ruthless people on earth, and I believe that they called in the 9/11 hit, and I believe it was planned and executed by Zionist members of the governments of Israel, the United States, UK, and others through collusion between Mossad, CIA, MI6, and others. That's personally what I believe. And because Israel was involved, and because this Khazarian Mafia is so ruthless, it's really like the Russian, quote, Jewish mob, Israeli mob. And who knows who whacked Philip Marshall. I don't believe he committed suicide. But they kill people like you and I for talking about this stuff.
Yep. When you go back to the whole Khazarian Mafia thing and all of that, when it comes to one fact, when I was watching a very good video by Syrian Girl, and it talks about the story, and apparently that Zionism and Judaism, a lot of the terror attacks in the world were done by them. A lot of the terror attacks, during the Palestine incident, when Palestine was being made. Back then, you had some Israeli government officials doing terror attacks on British people. You had some Israeli government officials, sending letter bombs to British people, British governors and French governors. And then it's just so strange, and knowing the fact, that the free terror groups, the free main terror, Zionist terror groups back then. Yeah. What is your opinion on the fact that those free groups formed to make the IDF? I mean, that is just, hearing about that, great video by Syrian Girl, hearing about that is just dodgy. I mean, it's just
I wasn't aware of that, actually. I wasn't aware of that, actually. You're more knowledgeable and informed than I am on some of the topics we're discussing, but I was not aware that is what formed the IDF.
It is very, very sketchy, It is. With your organization, What do you think will happen going forward? Do you think any justice will be done? Do you think that, the United States people will wake up, demand, for like justice, especially George Bush's involvement, his administration into 9/11, especially how trillions of dollars went missing out of the Pentagon, and like all of the people who died, all of the innocent people who were died in this inside job committed by the United States government. Do you think any justice will be done or no?
Most probably not in my mind. And that's part of what me personally was setting out to prove. The Lawyers Committee proved nothing is being done legally. We proved that nothing is being done politically. And we're in the process of going offshore to these Muslim countries. As a matter of fact, I personally am trying to get on Press TV in Tehran and Dolo TV in Kabul, Afghanistan, and Al Jazeera. Any TV station that would be willing to entertain our idea that the aircraft were remotely controlled. We're trying to get that word out. And if in the end we're unsuccessful there, then I don't see any hope of anyone bringing forth enough information to a forum that could serve justice. I don't see it happening. I mean, some people believe Trump's going to return to power and he's going to open a 9/11 commission. I'm not that optimistic.
Are you a fan of Donald Trump or no?
I'm not a fan really of the entire U.S. political system because I think that there's no such thing as two parties and that they pretend they are, but there's one big power pulling the strings on both sides of the aisle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very true. I think it's really going to be very difficult for, with you, Dan, with the whole, thing. I also saw that you wrote a letter to the Chinese president. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. Did you have any luck with that?
Well, there's two different letters I wrote to them about. One of them was trying to get them and Vladimir Putin to climb on board with this idea of the International Islamic Commission for 9/11 inquiry. But the other one was earlier this year or last year, China Eastern 5735 en route to Beijing. I don't know if you remember this. It was a 737.
Mm-hmm.
Took a nosedive from 29,000 feet to the surface in 2 minutes. And there was nothing wrong with the airplane. And there's no indication that either pilot interfered with the controls. And it smelled to me just like Malaysia Air 370 disappearing out over the Indian Ocean several years ago. Like the uninterruptible autopilot may have been used by someone. So I sent them all a joint letter to Xi Jinping, to the head of the Chinese Civil Aviation Authority, and the China Eastern CAO. I sent them a 66-page document on a USB flash drive device saying, look at this material. And I actually had a Chinese operative I was put in touch with who was trying to arrange for me, he had connections to government, was trying to arrange for me to come to China, but it was during the time when there was a two-week quarantine because of COVID. So we put it off long enough, but that still hasn't gotten solved. I mean, the horror of coming down from 29,000 feet in 2 minutes, that's 14,500 feet a minute. Fortunately, all the passengers would have passed out because of the negative G factor doing a maneuver like that. But it's a nightmare that has gone unsolved so far, and that's all I was doing there. Was trying. There was another pilot that actually introduced me to the uninterruptible autopilot system in 2007, and him and I both says, "Hey, we'll come to Beijing and brief you on the system if you like." And we never got an answer from any of them. So these letters are all available on our website that we've written. If you go to the drop-down menu, there's a tab called Letters. Click on that, and it shows you letters sent to the U.S., Pakistan, China, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, et cetera. We've got them posted on the website. So.
Hmm. Another thing I want to ask you is, from all the interviews you've done, what would you say was the most emotional interview you've done, like regarding when trying to explain your organization to people? Like the most one where, someone, what would you say was the toughest question that someone ever asked you?
Well, I don't know. They always want me to bring up. I didn't mention this, but I was illegally medically grounded in 2003 for speaking out about aviation safety and security as it relates to 9/11, and they want me to bring up that story, which leads to the fact that because I was terminated in what I was involved in, it ruined a 27-year marriage, alienated my two adult kids who don't talk to me. Uh, Ruined a 35-year career in aviation and my reputation. I lost about $4 million in pay, pension, and stock. So the fact that my kids, who still believe the official 9/11 story, don't talk to me, they blame me for the divorce as well. That's an emotional issue with me that sticks with me every day. I wish they would talk to me, but they don't.
Mhm. Yeah, so sorry to hear that, mate. That is
Yeah.
absolutely insane. So going back to that question where you say you asked people, you basically said, do you believe Israel's October 7th was a false flag attack and
Yeah.
was created to presume, the Great Israel Project? Like, what facts can you do to back up to claim it was like a false flag done by Israel to fulfill the greater Zionist project, especially, when then Benjamin Netanyahu on September the 23rd, 2023, this year, was going to the United Nations and was talking about creating a new Middle East, which is referring to that. When it comes
Right.
to the great, with this inside job, do you think that this is the thing that they are trying to do, like the one thing they are trying to do, trying to go with war, trying to go to war with Iran, knowing the fact that Iran hasn't, knowing the fact that Iran doesn't have a centralized bank? Do you think this is the moment where they are trying to go with war with Iran?
To answer your first question, I have no evidence whatsoever to prove it. It's purely speculation on my part. But if you look at them claiming that it was a breakdown in the intelligence system there and realizing how effective Mossad and the Israeli intelligence operation is, I cannot believe that they dropped the ball. I, I cannot believe that one of the most protected fences in the world was left unguarded and that Hamas was allowed to operate for 7 hours without any intervention. So people say, what are you telling me, that they allowed Israelis to be killed? Well, that's what happened with the USS Liberty. That's what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. They're all based on lies. So I, looking at a broad picture of what transpired the last 22 years, and people aren't familiar with the Greater Israel Project. And let me just mention there's a global research article, and it's entitled Greater Israel, the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. I strongly urge you to read that because it'll make it crystal clear what's going on right now. So the Greater Israel Project, for people that don't know, is uh, a plan that they have to rule. They consider all lands from the Nile River to the Euphrates part of the biblical prophesied promised land for Jews. And if you remember, after 9/11, as a matter of fact, it was 1 month after 9/11, General Wesley Clark was in the Pentagon visiting a fellow general, and he was handed an inter-office memorandum that was classified that basically said the United States plans on taking out 7 countries in 5 years. Well, you look what happened after 9/11. They took out 4 of the countries, and 3 are remaining, and they are Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. Well, Hezbollah is threatening to attack Israel if this bloodbath occurs. And Israel has stated that if Hezbollah gets involved in this operation, they're going to flatten Damascus and take out Assad. And if that were to happen, Russia and Iran would intercede and all hell would break loose. So, yes, I believe their end game In the interim here, they're going to clean out Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank altogether, is what I believe. I believe they want to take it all. And I believe they actually are looking for a war because they believe they can win it. As a matter of fact, I think these sicko neocon Zionists that are running the United States government right now actually believe that a first strike limited nuclear war is winnable, either with Russia or in the Mediterranean. And there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. If that happens, we're all dead. Most of us are.
Yeah. When you look at like people who say, so Dan, a lot of people make the mistake of making Zionism and Judaism the same. Like in my opinion, when I look at Zionism, I've done some more research in it, and it says here that in the late 18, as a group in Europe decided to colonize the land known as Zionists, they represent of extreme majority of the Jewish population, and their goal was to create a Jewish homeland. They consist in locations in Africa before settling this. When you look at Zionism, what would you say is the most, like, what would you say is the biggest mistake that people make, like comparing like Zionism with Judaism? And what would you say, from doing all your research in your life, what would you say is the most dangerous belief that Zionists have in their ideology?
Well, this fact that they think they own that land is one thing. I mean, here's the thing about that. You've got AIPAC, the ADL, and Chuck Schumer, and some people in government, all saying that if you criticize Israel or Zionism, you're an anti-Semite. They label you as such. And Zionism is a political ideology, and for the most part has nothing to do with Judaism or Jews, okay? And that is a mistake so many people make, labeling. I will tell you right now, I don't believe that Israel's entitled to that land, and I don't consider myself to be an anti-Semite, but I am opposed to Zionism because I know what other things they've been involved in. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question, because Jews are very peaceful people. Muslims are very peaceful people. I mean, especially when you look at like Palestine for years had Muslims, Christians, and Jews all living together peacefully. Even when the kingdom of Syria was around, you also had Jews, Christians, and Muslims living peacefully. Nowadays, you still have a lot of Christians, Jews, Muslims in Iran living together. You have a lot of them in Iraq, a lot of them in Algeria, Morocco. And it's like, and yet the media doesn't expose the fact that there's a lot of Jewish people who don't like the state of Israel. They think what the Israeli government is doing to the Palestinians is bad, and it's horrific. And I think, you know, it's complicated, but the problem is, Dan, is you have a lot of people who will say that the Jews are to blame, but yet it doesn't help that, because in my opinion, the globalist elite, the banking cartel, where it's BlackRock, you know, World Economic Forum, are a different race of people. I believe a lot of them follow different ideologies, Zionism, Islam, but mostly, and they follow Christianity, but they follow a fake type of Christianity, where it's Christian Zionism, New Age Christianity, and also Satanism, which basically come from Babylon. In my honest opinion, I think when it comes to the whole Jewish like Balkan spirit, it doesn't help, because you got to remember, you know, these Zionists who control the United States government, these bankers who control the United States government, you'll have a lot of, you know, far right people, for instance, who will say that, oh, Hitler was against the elite, Hitler was against the establishment, Hitler, you know, was trying to fight against the Rothschilds, but he wasn't. He, you know, what actually happened is he was funded by the Rothschilds. He was funded by George Bush's family. After the collapse of the Weimar Republic, George Bush's family was helped bring into power, you know, by the Rothschild and Rockefellers. And they, you know, and how on earth can they say Hitler was a good guy, especially, you know, when Nazism, his ideology, is an evil ideology, especially when you look at, you know, the Ukrainian neo-Nazis that are funded by the same people who fund the Israeli government and the bankers and all that, especially when you look at all the, you know, evil atrocities they've done to the ethnic Russians in Donbass and Lugansk, especially when you look at, you know, the Polish people who were killed by the Ukrainian Nazis. when you look at like all of the Serbians who were killed by the Croatian, Nazis. Zionism and Nazism is kind of the same thing. It's the Khazarian Mafia created the Nazis. They created these Nazis. These are the people who created ISIS, created Al Qaeda. They created the Azov Battalion. If anything, they created the Ku Klux Klan too. They created the Ku Klux Klan. These are the same people, if anything, who did, the Armenian genocide. So to say, it really annoys me because Judaism is a peaceful religion. It is. Islam, I mean, it's different. Christianity, Islam is peaceful. Zionism is not. So for people to blame Jews, to say that Jews are the problem of the world. No, it's not. Because to blame Jews for all the problems in the world, it doesn't make sense, Dan, because that's what the elite want. It's just like how you have conservatives say, how they'll blame Muslims for the problem in the world. You'll also, have other people who will blame Hindus, who will blame Catholics. And, it's for me, honestly, I think Hitler was a psychopath. He was an evil guy. He was a part of the elite. And I really, really think that conservatives, especially, a lot of America First and Nick Fuentes fans, really are brainwashed. And a lot of them, don't realize that Hitler was funded by the Rothschild and Rockefellers. He was funded by the globalist elite. He was funded by George Bush's family. And it's funny to say, Nazis are good people. They're not good people, especially when you look at the things, that they are doing to the ethnic Russians in Ukraine and what they're doing, what they did to the Polish people in Ukraine. It's no different to what the Israeli army and the IDF is doing to the Palestinians. It's no different, what happened to the Armenians. In your opinion, sorry, Dan, I'm going on a bit of a rant. I just had to let that. In your opinion, Dan, how much of a big connection is there with Nazism and Zionism?
I can't answer that question. I'm not really sure. You mentioned Zionism as if it's a religion, and it's not.
Yeah, it's an ideology. Sorry, I get that a bit confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know enough about Nazism to make a statement.
It is a very, very evil ideology. It is very evil, So, Dan, with this going forward, what do you think will happen, in the future of humanity? Do you think in the future of humanity is going to win against the New World Order? Do you think that Russia and China, will succeed in creating BRICS, which is to fight against the globalist banking system? And what do you think is going to happen to the United States? Do you think we're going to see civil war, like the possibility of Trump being assassinated? How do you see it going?
Well, that last statement you made, I believe, could happen coming into the election, if there is one. Unless they come up with another reason not to have the election, but then there'd be riots, I think. But I'm not optimistic. I mean, the problem we have in the world today is the Zionist owned and controlled mainstream media, supporting everything the government's saying. And let me just interject this with regard to the mainstream media. I always bring it up. In 1983, there were 50 independent news media outlets. Today, there's only 6 media conglomerates that control 96% of the news we read, see, or hear. And that same year, Israel launched the Hezbollah project. And the intent was to take control of the U.S. media and force it to show Israel in a favorable light, which is what it's done. Now, if you look at the management of the 6 global conglomerates, it's been infiltrated totally by Zionists at every level. And that's our problem. I think that there are too many couch potatoes in the United States sitting down watching CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News and taking what they're hearing as gospel. And it's not. It's far from it. So unless people awaken and start going to alt media and start doing their own research on the internet, I have a pretty grim view of what's coming down the pike. And you're right. If China and Russia, which some people argue with me, no, they're part of the cabal, but if they're not, and they're fighting the New World Order, I consider them to be the last hope. I consider that in part to be what's being fought out in Russia. I mean, in the Ukraine.
in my opinion, and in my opinion, I think China are winning that. And I just saw a tweet right now by you, Dan, saying, I never knew this. It says here the United States, stood down intercept fighters on 9/11 because they wanted to occur. Wow. I never knew that there were, intercept fighters to stop the planes, from happening. Wow, to hear that from the United States government. I mean, that just makes me angry. It's just unacceptable, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a air traffic controller I heard on a podcast, and I got in touch with him, and we became friends. But he was on a podcast, caught my attention, and he gave all the details of where the glitch was in the system that the NORAD fighters didn't intercept these jets that were allowed to operate for over an hour undetected. So, that's another piece to the puzzle. These are the intercept fighters.
Yeah. So, Dan, before we finish up, what would you like to say to the audience? One more thing you'd like to say to the audience?
Well, I really came on to discuss the website material, and I encourage people to go to 911pilots.org and read it. It's a simple read, and there's videos on there, and see if you don't come to the same conclusion as we did, that the Muslim hijackers couldn't control the 9/11 aircraft. I might also mention, since you brought up Twitter, I'm on there at Dan Hanley 4, and Facebook at Dan Hanley, or Captain Dan Hanley. And if you want to get in touch with me, just use either one of the messenger services there, or we've got a contact us page on the website. You can get a hold of it. So I appreciate you having me on your program. Sorry, you're much more knowledgeable than I am on a number of topics we discussed here. Sorry, I couldn't contribute more to the conversation in that regard.
So anyways, thank you very much, Dan, for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
And thank you. Thank you again.
I just want to say before you go, thank you for coming on, Dan. And I just want to say to everybody, please go and like and subscribe Dan's work. Give him all the support he deserves. He's fantastic when it comes to this work. It's very good. He's brilliant when it comes to the whole 9/11 narrative. You'll have a lot of fun reading, a lot of the articles he said. So please, ladies and gentlemen, go give him the like and subscribe he deserves. Go follow him on Twitter. And I just want to say to everybody, please remember to like and subscribe and to share this video to all your family and friends. Thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 134. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. Stay safe and have a nice day. God bless you all. And bye.